Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I am back again today doing another video. It has been a while since my last video, but I was on a pretty lengthy vacation, but now I'm back and ready to do some videos and have fun and talk about the NBA. So the subject of today's video, which is something that came up while I was actually on this vacation last week, was the announcement that the Rockets are willing to trade any player to try and improve their team for next year. Daryl Morey said the only exception really is James Harden, who he foresees barely or basically no trade being good enough to trade James Harden, but he said basically any player could be traded from our team. And so the two guys that this is really focused in on because they're the two players of the most value would be or Clint Capela and Chris Paul, and then to a lesser extent Eric Gordon. But for today's video, I'm going to be focused on potential Clint Capela trades. So I've made up 5 hypothetical trade scenarios, and I'm going to go through them and discuss why teams would do them and how they would look afterwards, after the trade, and stuff like that. But just in case you're unfamiliar, last year Clint Capela put up averages of 17 points per game, 13 rebounds, 1 assist a game, 1 steal, 1.5 blocks per game. He shot 65% from the field and 65% or 64% from the free throw line. So that's some info on Clint Capela in case you're unfamiliar with his statistics. So a pretty good center. He's definitely in the category of the DeAndre Jordan type of center, and if you don't know what that is, it's basically good defender, good at blocking and blocking shots, and then their main offensive attribute is that they can catch lobs and set good screens, basically, and that they're a good rebounder. So you have a lot of those guys in the league like that now. You have DeAndre Jordan, Clint Capela. You have a guy, Dwight Howard is now that kind of player when he is healthy. You got guys like Jarrett Allen who are becoming more like that, and even to a lesser extent, less athletic. But Steven Adams is like that kind of player too. These guys that don't really have a defined offensive skill set, but they're really good on defense and they're good at setting screens and doing the pick and roll on offense. So that's their main offensive attribute. So the first trade I have here today for Clint Capela actually features both Clint Capela and Chris Paul, and it's the two of them going to the Boston Celtics in exchange for Gordon Hayward, Marcus Smart, and Jaylen Brown. I feel like this is actually a pretty fair trade for each side. As for Boston, you get, if they lose Kyrie, you get a pretty good replacement in Chris Paul, who can still play at an above average starters level. And then you get Clint Capela, who would fill in nicely at center, and then they could permanently move Horford to power forward. Like, he's really liked playing at that when he can play next to Aaron Baines, but that you can't really play Aaron Baines too much just because he's a limited player. And Clint Capela would be a very nice upgrade over Aaron Baines. And so if they did this trade, and let's say that they lost Kyrie, their starting lineup would be something like Chris Paul, probably, and then you're gonna have Chris Paul, Horford, Clint Capela, Jason Tatum, and then probably somebody that you sign in free agency to replace uh, Kyrie Irving, because you'll have like 25 million in in cap space in free agency. And then as for the Rockets, what do you get here? You do lose your starting point guard, but you can essentially just flip James Harden to the point guard position. You can start Jaylen Brown and Gordon Hayward right away, in my opinion, and then you can have Marcus Smart be a good Tony Allen type off the bench, which he's been for the last couple of years. He can also act as your backup point guard or shooting guard if you'd like. And so the Rockets afterwards, their starting lineup would look something like um, James Harden, Jaylen Brown, Gordon Hayward, PJ Tucker, and then if they don't sign another center, Nene or Fareed, probably Fareed would be starting at center. And then off the bench, you'd have Marcus Smart, Eric Gordon, Fareed, some of those other guys. So the thing for the Rockets here is you don't necessarily get the best player in the trade, but you do get a lot of guys that could help your depth, and you could end up in a situation where you don't just have to play 6 or 7 guys come the playoffs. You could feel comfortable playing 8 or 9 and reduce the load management on Harden, which could be useful. You also get the youngest and potentially most promising player in this trade in Jaylen Brown. You also move off of Chris Paul's 4 remaining years of his max contract. Yes, you get back Gordon Hayward's three. Let's see here. He's got 3 years left on his deal, I believe. Oh wait, no, he only has 2 years left on his contract actually. And uh, so, excuse me, Chris Paul has 3 years left on his deal, and Gordon Hayward has two. But Gordon Hayward actually makes $4 million less as well. So you're getting off of Chris Paul's money a year earlier, and you're actually saving 5 million or about $4 to $5 million with this trade. Um, and then also you get Marcus Smart, a great backup, and as I said, Jaylen Brown probably has like the most potential. And I think Gordon Hayward would really nicely fill that void that Trevor Ariza left. You'd have to sort of reinvent his play style for him to be like a spot up shooter and just more of a defender. But I think he could actually fit that bill pretty well. On to our next trade here. I have Clint Capela going to the San Antonio Spurs for basically a combination of a bunch of role players, but this would again just be to improve the Rockets' depth and their shooting. I have them getting back Marco Bellinelli, Bryn Forbes, and Davis Bertans. So you would, after this trade, you'd probably have to start a lineup for the Spurs. Would be a lot easier. Your starting lineup would be like Dejounte Murray. Uh, De, let's see here, Dejounte Murray, maybe Patty Mills, DeMar DeRozan, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Clint Capella, which would be a pretty formidable lineup, assuming they don't re-sign Rudy Gay. That is. It could also sub in Derek White for Dejounte Murray. It'd be whatever their preference would be. And then for the Rockets, your starting lineup doesn't necessarily get better, but I think your second unit gets bolstered significantly. So you have a starting lineup that probably looks like Chris Paul, James Harden, PJ Tucker, Kenneth Faried, and then at small forward, it's kind of whoever they would decide to start, maybe Gerald Green or somebody. And then off the bench, you'd have a pretty powerful bench with Bryn Forbes, Bellinelli, Davis Bertans, Eric Gordon. That's Nene. That's a second unit that I feel really comfortable with, and you have a ton of shooting to plug into the starting lineup too. At any given time, you could run Chris Paul, James Harden, Marco Bellinelli, Davis Bertans, and then even if you want to do small ball, PJ Tucker at center, and that's a great shooting lineup. So basically, for this trade, they'd just be adding a lot of shooting and depth to their team. Now, next, this is the trade that I probably would see being least likely, but I figured why not throw it in just because. I have Clint Capela going to the Knicks in exchange for Dennis Smith Jr. and Kevin Knox. So in this trade, the Knicks get a good quality starting center, and they have plenty of cap space to play with. So they're taking on about an additional $6 million here by taking on Capella for the two guys they traded, but they can definitely afford it because I think they have something like $65 million in cap space. And that still leaves you tons of space to sign two guys who could be max free agents like Durant for 30 and Kyrie for 30, and then you'd have a big three of those guys. This would not definitely not be their number one priority in the offseason, but maybe if they miss out on something or if they somehow don't get AD in a trade, then they could opt for this, and it would still be a pretty viable option for them. And also Capella's on a good contract at $13 million a year. That's about 10 less than DeAndre Jordan's 22 million a year, and they're essentially the same player except Capella is a lot cheaper and about 8 years younger. So I think that's a pretty good deal for the Knicks. And then on the Rockets side, you get a guy who you can definitively start at small forward finally in Kevin Knox, and you wouldn't have to mess around with a bunch of different rotations. You could just have him fill in for that sort of Trevor Ariza void that they've had. And then Dennis Smith Jr. would be a really good guy to have come off of the bench. Him and Eric Gordon could be a really good second unit, or you can mix and match and have a unit on the floor of, let's say, Harden, Gordon, and DSJ, or you could have Chris Paul slide DSJ to shooting guard and then have Gordon, or you could basically play any of those four guys in the 1 to 3 positions and they would mesh pretty well. So I think that from that perspective, this could work really well. And then Kevin Knox could be a small forward or small ball power forward when you want to have PJ Tucker at center. And so they would have to start Fareed probably in most games, but I think he honestly has had a comeback season this year and played pretty well, so I trust him as a starting center for this team. The next deal I have is somewhat of a tricky one, and it could arguably be the least realistic, but I'll just present it here. I have the Rockets and Hawks trading Capella for Kevin Huerter and one of the Hawks' top 10 picks. whichever one that they would be willing to give up. This would work really well for both teams, I think. You get Kevin Herter for the Rockets, who could be a starting small forward or could come off the bench with Eric Gordon and be a bolster to your bench. He had a pretty good rookie season. I think he averaged around 10 points a game on pretty decent shooting splits, and no one expected him to do anything in the league, so that is impressive. And then you get a top 10 pick, which could be very useful just to integrate some youth into this team because the average age is like 32 on the Rockets, and they need to get a little bit younger. As for the Hawks, you get a really good a starting center who is definitely above average, and I think that run and gun style that the Hawks are going for would work really well with Capella. Your starting lineup after this would probably look something like Trae Young, um, Kent Bazemore, um, probably then Alan Crabb, John Collins, and Clint Capela. This also works well in that the Hawks are losing Dwayne Dedman this offseason, probably, unless they're willing to re-sign him. But either way, I like that. I like that core three of Trae Young, John Collins, and Clint Capela. I think that that would be a promising young team to be working with. And as for our last trade that I've set up here, it would be Clint Capela going to the Charlotte Hornets in exchange for basically a lot like the Spurs trade, just a bunch of role players to pad the depth of this team because the Rockets just seem to not have much depth, honestly. And in the playoffs, they only have about 7 guys that they trust to play in big minutes. And not that these guys would be playing like 30 minutes a night in the playoffs, but they're just guys that could be good for depth during the regular season and save up some energy to for the key guys to have more um, rest going into the postseason. And guys like in the regular season, I would trust them. And the guys are Malik Monk, Mikal Bridges, or Miles Bridges, excuse me, I get those two confused, and then Willie Hernan Gomez. So in after this trade, the Hornets, if they re-sign Kemba, they could form a duo of him and Capella along with their other dudes of Marvin Williams, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Nicholas Batum, Jeremy Lamb if they re-sign him. Just basically the same team, but like trading Clint Capella for a bunch of dudes that get a few minutes but not a ton, and just reduce some of the minute sharing that this team has to do because they have so many players that are around the same skill level. And so they could just play Capella 34 minutes a night and not really worry about like who's going to be our center. Is it going to be Cody Zeller? Is it going to be Bismack Biyombo? Is it going to be Frank Kaminsky? You just know Clint Capella is a starting center. And as for the Rockets, starting lineup after this is probably going to look like Chris Paul, James Harden, Miles Bridges, PJ Tucker, and Willie Hernan Gomez. And then off the bench, you'd have Eric Gordon, Malik Monk, um, Kenneth Faried, Nene. So still some good options there. And you're just padding your depth again and finding finally a solution to that small forward that they just could not find last year after losing Ariza. And that actually does it for today, guys. Those are the trades that I came up with for Clint Capella. Let me know what you guys think, and if you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. If you have any trade proposals of your own that you've thought of, post them below. I'd love to see them. Hope you guys, again, enjoy the video, and I hope you have a good day. See you next time. Bye.